The first days in captivity were tense and heavy, filled with quiet suspicion and wary stares, as hundreds of Japanese soldiers were ushered through the barbed wire of the American camp. Their uniforms hung in tatters, stiff with sweat and dirt, worn thin by long battles and the harsh march to surrender. The heat, the dust of endless island roads, the relentless tropical sun, they had endured it all. Yet nothing had prepared them for what waited inside these gates. After the paperwork, the medical checkups and the handout of meager supplies, they were herded into a sprawling wooden hall, its ceiling crisscrossed with pipes. The prisoners froze. This place was unlike anything they had seen in the Pacific Theater. Metal lines stretched overhead, each with nozzles and drains beneath, strange and unfamiliar. The American guards moved with brisk precision, gesturing for them to undress and form a line. Only then did the soldiers begin to understand. They were not merely captives. They were being told to wash. Confusion rippled through the ranks. For most Japanese soldiers, bathing during the war was a rare, makeshift affair. Rivers, the ocean, whatever they could manage. Soap was a luxury almost never afforded. And now, under the eyes of the enemy they had fought for so long, they were being guided into a meticulous, almost ritualistic act of cleanliness. Many clutched their few belongings tightly, unsure if this was genuine or some kind of trap. Whispers rippled through the line as steam curled from the pipes above. Memories of warnings passed down by their officers came back. The Americans were ruthless. Captivity meant humiliation. Prisoners were said to be treated worse than animals. And now, staring at these gleaming metal showers, doubt gnawed at them. Was this some hidden cruelty? The guards, impatient with hesitation, barked commands in English and gestured sharply. Shoes, belts, tunics, everything had to go. Slowly, reluctant hands obeyed, unfastening buttons and exposing bodies scarred from months in the jungles. Vulnerable and humiliated, the men stood bare before strangers and one another. Clutching the bars of soap pressed into their palms, they waited. Then the water hissed to life. Streams of hot liquid poured from the pipes above, sudden and intense. For a moment every man froze, bracing for pain, but instead the warmth spread across their shoulders and backs, washing away layers of dirt and sweat. A surprising calm settled over them. Some closed their eyes, letting the grime swirl down the drains. Others rubbed carefully at the soap, almost testing if it was truly allowed. Slowly, fear gave way to awe. Months, perhaps years, had passed since they felt warmth like this. On the islands where they fought, water had been rationed, showers non-existent, and lice and disease constant companions. To stand under a steady stream of hot water, with no buckets, no shouting officers, no limits, was almost unimaginable. Even in enemy hands, they felt cleaner than they had ever been in their own barracks. When the men finally stepped out, thick cotton towels awaited them, folded neatly in stacks. Many touched the fabric as though it were a strange, precious artifact. Drying themselves awkwardly, unaccustomed to such comfort, they shuffled out, hair dripping, skin flushed from the heat. A quiet murmur of astonishment passed through the group. The fear that had gripped them on entry was replaced by a new feeling, bewilderment. Had their captors truly offered comfort instead of cruelty? That first encounter with the showers stayed with them long after. It marked the start of a series of discoveries that would challenge everything they had been taught about the enemy. This moment wasn't just about washing away dirt. It was about confronting the gap between expectation and reality. The modern shower, with its endless hot water and soap, became a symbol, a small but profound window into another civilization, a reminder that captivity might bring unexpected lessons rather than degradation. When the first showers ended and the prisoners shuffled back into the barracks, a heavy, uneasy silence settled over the room. They perched on wooden benches, some clutching their neatly folded uniforms, others rubbing at their hair with the thick towels, still unsure if they had just received a rare kindness or walked straight into a trap. Eye contact was scarce. Speaking aloud felt risky, as if breaking an invisible rule might invite disaster. Deep inside, a lingering doubt gnawed at them. They had been warned again and again that capture by Americans meant dishonor, suffering, and death. Before every battle, Japanese officers had painted grim images of sadistic camps, of starvation, humiliation, and abuse. And yet their very first act in this enemy camp had been bathing, soap, hot water, cleanliness, Too much, too civilized, too kind. One man, a former naval mechanic from Yokosuka, thought of the Allied propaganda leaflets he had scoffed at, the smiling prisoners receiving meals, resting and writing letters home. He had always dismissed them as lies, meant to break Japanese morale. Now, freshly washed for the first time in months, those images returned with a shiver. Could some of it have been true after all? But a darker thought crept in, sharper and more terrifying. What if the showers were not meant for comfort at all? Rumors flitted quietly among the men, carried by those who remembered wartime whispers. Words like gas chambers were spoken in hushed tones, comparisons drawn to vague stories of the Germans in Europe. Few knew the details, yet the seed of fear spread quickly. The guards noticed the hesitation. They watched groups of prisoners hesitate at doorways, faces tight with mistrust. Commands were repeated. Translators in broken Japanese insisted that bathing was simply routine hygiene. But suspicion is not easily washed away. For men trained to believe surrender was the ultimate disgrace, even acts of care tasted of deception. Every gesture of comfort carried a shadow of doubt, a reminder that in war, nothing was ever truly free. They hesitated under the water, unsure if the soap might be poisoned, if the warmth of the showers hid some hidden danger. Some barely wet their arms and backs, wary of what might lurk in the seemingly generous ritual. The clash of cultures made everything feel even stranger. In Japan, bathing was more than cleanliness. It was ritual, a spiritual act in hot springs or communal baths. But war had stripped that away. Soldiers had gone weeks without washing, crawling with lice, fighting infections at every turn. The camp showers were the opposite, industrial, efficient, precise. Rows of steel pipes and drains, no privacy, no ceremony, just a machine-like order. To the Americans, it was simple hygiene. To the Japanese, it felt alien, cold, almost dehumanizing. A ritual without meaning, functional yet unsettling. For days, the men whispered among themselves, questioning the purpose. Why waste hot water on captives? Why hand out soap, towels, and time when they could leave them filthy? Was it kindness or some subtle method to weaken them? Theories spread in the dim barracks. Perhaps it was control, softening men with comfort. Maybe the water hid chemicals. Fear clung to them, reinforced by decades of warnings from officers. And yet, nothing happened. No hidden cruelty, no punishment. Every evening they returned to the barracks alive, breathing, cleaner than before. Gradually, suspicion began to give way to quiet curiosity. The process repeated each day. Soap was handed out, towels issued, guards ensured everyone entered the hall, and still nothing terrible occurred. The prisoners' confusion grew. What kind of enemy would care if captives smelled clean or carried fewer lice? For men raised to fear capture above death itself, the realization was as disorienting as the showers themselves. Over time, the rhythm became routine. Morning or evening, depending on the schedule, guards lined them up and marched them to the hall. Soap, wrapped in paper and scented sharply of chemicals unfamiliar to home, and towels stamped with military markings were distributed. The process was mechanical. Strip, step under the water, wash thoroughly, dry, dress, and return. But as days stretched into weeks, a subtle understanding emerged. This was not temporary. Cleanliness was not just a favor. It was a rule, enforced as strictly as curfews or roll call. The showers, once terrifying and alien, were now a quiet, unyielding part of camp life. The Americans used interpreters to explain the hygiene routine, gesturing patiently to show how to use the soap properly. Men were instructed to scrub every part of their bodies, not just arms and faces, but feet, hair, and the hidden folds where lice and sweat lingered. Medics followed with thorough inspections of clothing seams and bedding, checking for signs of infestation. Delousing powder was handed out, along with fresh undergarments. For the first time, many Japanese soldiers realized that the enemy treated disease prevention with the same seriousness they reserved for food or weapons. Hygiene wasn't a luxury to the Americans. It was a matter of discipline, order, and health. For the prisoners, the routine brought a strange mix of shame and fascination. On one hand, they were stripped of privacy and individuality, made to wash on command like schoolboys. On the other, they discovered life without constant itching, sores, and infected wounds was tolerable. A corporal who had fought on Guadalcanal recalled weeks when his unit bathed only in muddy streams, while tropical ulcers spread among his men. Now, after only a few weeks of enforced showers, the sores on his legs began to heal. The cough that had plagued him faded. The improvement was undeniable and bitterly ironic, gnawing at his pride. Language barriers caused early confusion. Commands shouted in broken Japanese were often misunderstood, and some men did the bare minimum. When they tried to skip steps, guards made them return under the streams, watching impatiently until every inch was properly scrubbed. Some muttered resentfully about the degrading nature of it all. Yet even in protest, the results could not be denied. Uniforms, washed on a strict schedule, no longer reeked of rot and sweat. Blankets carried a faint, clean scent instead of mildew. The barracks, once suffocating with the stench of unwashed bodies, became livable, even for those who never admitted it. Slowly, suspicion gave way to habit, and what once felt like humiliation became routine, a strange, unexpected rhythm of camp life. Gradually, the prisoners began to accept the routine, lining up with less resistance. They learned to scrub thoroughly, dry themselves carefully, and fold the towels just as instructed. Some even began comparing the soaps, noting which lathered better or smelled less harsh. Small details, perhaps trivial to anyone else, became a form of conversation, a way to pass the long hours of idleness. Hygiene had shifted from a strict order into a shared ritual, quietly binding the men together. What struck them most was the realization that their captors expected them to maintain dignity even in confinement. Showers and soap were not merely about disease control. They were about enforcing a standard of humanity. The Japanese army, soldiers had been taught that comfort was weakness, that endurance of filth and pain marked honor. Now, under the relentless discipline of their enemy, they were discovering that cleanliness could be as much a part of discipline as handling a rifle. This clash of values unsettled them, yet it also planted the first seeds of reluctant respect for the strange order of their captors. The first time hot water cascaded over their shoulders, many gasped, some even stepping back as though scalded. The warmth was steady and controlled, pouring from the overhead nozzles in a way they had never experienced. For men used to makeshift washing in cold rivers or buckets, the sensation bordered on luxury. Steam rose quickly, curling through the air and softening the harsh barrack light. The pungent foreign soap foamed thickly on their skin, lifting away months of grime. They rubbed tentatively at first, then with growing vigor, marveling at how easily the lather rinsed away. For some, the experience was overwhelming. They remembered long campaigns in the jungles, when officers warned them to conserve every drop of water, teaching that cleanliness was secondary to survival. On remote islands, baths were rare. Soldiers wiped themselves with rags, skin perpetually sticky with sweat, salt, and dust. Hot water, when it could be heated in cans or drums, was a rare blessing, shared among dozens of men. Here, each prisoner had his own stream of warmth, endless and unrestrained. It was not just bathing. It was immersion in another world. The towels deepened the shock. Thick, absorbent, and unfamiliar, they replaced the thin cloths men once shared in barracks. Prisoners pressed them to their faces, inhaling the faint chemical scent of detergent. Their skin felt renewed, pores open, the sticky film of the tropics finally gone. The relief was more than physical. It stirred long-suppressed emotions. Some remembered family baths back home. Memories of mothers drawing hot water before the war upended everything. Others recalled public bathhouses, distant echoes of a civilian life now far away. The Americans performed the routine without sentiment, distributing soap and towels with the same efficiency as rations. For them, it was procedure, disease prevention, morale management, order. But for the prisoners, it became a quiet revelation. The irony was bitter, yet undeniable. Under the hands of their supposed enemy, they had found comfort, cleanliness, and a reminder of a world they thought had vanished. They had braced themselves for cruelty. Yet instead they found comfort greater than anything they had known, even among their own ranks. Some felt a pang of shame, believing such indulgence made them weak. Others accepted it quietly, grateful for a moment that let their weary bodies feel human again. Gradually, the showers reshaped daily life. They did more than wash away lice or dirt. Hot water soothed aches and accelerated healing. Hair, once greasy and matted, grew soft and manageable. The clinging stench of sweat faded from uniforms, replaced by the sharp, clean scent of disinfectant soap. Even the air of the barracks lightened, less suffocating as regular bathing reduced the odor of so many bodies confined together. Prisoners watched these changes with astonishment, silently recognizing that they were healthier than they had been in the jungles of combat. The paradox gnawed at them. How could the enemy, the very nation they had been taught to hate, provide care their own army had denied? The showers were more than cleanliness. They were proof of a system so organized, so well-resourced, it could extend comfort even to captives. Standing beneath the steady streams of hot water, the men felt a mix of envy and unease. This world was alien, far removed from the one they had left behind, and it highlighted how far Japan lagged in providing even basic dignity to its soldiers. At night, when the barracks fell into dimness and the long rows of prisoners lay on their cots, conversations drifted back to comparisons with their lives in the Imperial Army. They didn't speak of weapons or battles, but of soap towels and the shock of hot water. It was hardly a topic considered honorable, yet the contrast was too striking to ignore. In the Japanese military, bathing had been rare, an act only possible when circumstances allowed. Officers preached endurance, instructing men to ignore bodily discomfort and to embrace filth as a mark of toughness. Now in captivity, they were learning a different lesson, one of hygiene, care, and the unexpected humanity of their captors. Soldiers often went weeks without washing, their skin layered in grime, uniforms stiff with dried sweat. Lice and fleas burrowed in clothing seams. Tropical ulcers festered untreated. The stench of unwashed bodies clung to every march, every camp, every night in the field. Complaining was a sign of weakness, unworthy of a true warrior. Yet in the American camps, cleanliness was enforced as strictly as discipline itself. One former sergeant recalled how his unit in New Guinea had shared a single rusty basin of water for 30 men. Faces and hands were rinsed, but real bathing was unimaginable. Now in captivity, endless streams of hot water flowed freely. Another man muttered that in Manchuria, his regiment had suffered frostbite, not just from cold, but from months of wearing the same unwashed socks. Disease had crippled entire units more efficiently than bullets ever could. Here, however, every man scrubbed his feet daily. Medics inspected for infection as though the soldiers' health mattered. The irony struck sharply. Even the proudest men could not deny the truth. Their bodies were improving. Rashes faded, lice vanished, sores healed. Stomachs, once twisted with parasites, settled under the rhythm of regular washing and clean clothes. Slowly, the prisoners connected these improvements with the very routines they had resisted. For the first time, they realized that hygiene was not weakness. It was strength, a weapon against disease far more powerful than stubborn endurance. The reflections extended beyond the physical. Many recalled Japan's rich bathing traditions, onsen in the mountains, wooden tubs in village homes, the warmth of family rituals. War had stripped these away, leaving men to survive in filth. Now, in captivity, the enemy had returned what their own army had denied. The paradox unsettled them. Some spoke of it longingly, remembering mothers heating kettles in the evenings. Others fell silent, ashamed that it was not Japan, but America, restoring this dignity. The guards never understood the depth of the shock. For them, hygiene was simply practical, regulations and public health. Orders were issued without sentiment, never imagining that showers could carry such profound meaning. But inside the wire, fences, men lay awake, staring at the rafters, realizing the military life they had known was flawed. Enduring filth was not strength, ignoring disease was not honor, and a single thought whispered among them. If America cared this much for captives, how much more must it care for its own soldiers? The thought lingered uncomfortably, impossible to ignore. Weeks turned into months, and the hygiene routine that had once felt alien became a steady rhythm of captivity. Every man knew the order of the day: wake up, roll call, meals, and, at set times, the march to the shower hall. What had once been met with suspicion now unfolded almost without thought. Guards no longer barked loudly, and prisoners no longer shuffled with reluctance. They moved in quiet lines, soap tucked into their palms, towels draped across shoulders, as if it had always been this way. The transformation was more than physical, it was mental. Stripped of weapons and cause, the Japanese soldiers discovered something unexpected. A fragment of dignity. Uniforms, laundered and pressed, no longer reeked of decay. Bodies, scrubbed and inspected, were free of lice and festering sores. Even small puddles after rain reflected healthier faces, cheeks less gaunt, skin less scarred by disease. It was undeniable improvement, though few admitted it aloud. Cleanliness became more than survival. It was proof that they had not been entirely reduced to shadows of men. The barracks shifted subtly. Coughs diminished. The scratching of infested scalps faded. Blankets smelled faintly of soap instead of mildew. Guards sometimes remarked, smirking, that the prisoners looked more orderly than when they arrived. Some men bristled at this, convinced the routines were meant to soften them. Yet the truth could not be denied. They felt stronger. Wounds healed faster, sleep deepened, and energy, though bound by captivity, returned steadier than before. For some, this sparked quiet pride rather than shame. Towels were folded neatly after drying, boots polished with care, barracks kept swept and orderly. It recalled old traditions from home, the meticulous rituals of Japanese households. Cleanliness was not submission. It was reclaiming pieces of themselves buried under the mud and chaos of war. Conversations shifted as well. Men once too weary to speak now shared quiet observations about the strange irony of feeling refreshed, about the realization that they were healthier here, under enemy care, than in the field. American medics, practical and unsentimental, kept careful records of the changes. Fewer cases of dysentery, fewer infestations, fewer deaths. To the Americans, it was proof the system worked. To the Japanese prisoners, it was an awakening. They could not ignore that their captors treated hygiene as a matter of discipline and respect, not a luxury, but a requirement. The lesson unsettled them. It stood in stark contrast to their own military ethos, where endurance of filth was a badge of honor. Here, the opposite was true. Cleanliness was order, and order was strength. Over time, the suspicion that had clung to the showers faded almost entirely. Men no longer whispered about poisoned soap or hidden cruelty behind the water pipes. Instead, many began to anticipate the warmth, even crave it. The ritual became a small, precious relief in a life stripped of freedom. Some lingered under the streams longer than allowed, closing their eyes, letting the water wash away not just dirt, but the memories of defeat and exhaustion. In the quiet of these routines, prisoners discovered that hygiene was more than a rule enforced by guards. It was a restoration of dignity, a way to feel human again, even inside barbed wire. By the time autumn winds swept across the camp and days grew shorter, the conversations among prisoners had changed. Gone were the whispered debates about poison or disguised cruelty. Instead, talk turned to astonishment, the realization that these daily rituals of soap, hot water, and towels were not random, but symbols of something greater. In the dim barracks, men sat cross-legged on their bunks, sharing stories of their first encounters with the showers. They laughed awkwardly at their initial fear, marveling at how natural and routine it had all become. One prisoner, once a stern infantry officer, admitted that the first time he stepped into the steaming shower, he had been certain it was a trap meant to kill them. The others laughed quietly at the memory, shaking their heads, though many confessed they had felt the same tension and fear. A younger, more talkative man compared the camp showers to the great public bathhouses of Tokyo he had visited as a boy. The recollection stirred murmurs of nostalgia, transporting the prisoners for a moment back to tiled floors and wooden buckets, to evenings when families and neighbors shared warmth and ritual. The irony was sharp. Fragments of those old memories returned, but only in enemy hands. What unsettled them more than the showers themselves was what they revealed about America. If this country could provide endless hot water and soap for prisoners, what must it offer its own soldiers? If towels and hygiene were distributed so freely here, what luxuries waited on bases back home? The contrast with their own experience gnawed at them. They remembered comrades dying from infections when there was no clean water to wash wounds. Soldiers marching under the relentless sun, lice burrowing into their scalps. Men wasting away not just from hunger, but from the slow destruction of their bodies by dirt and disease. To see the enemy prioritize hygiene so seriously forced many prisoners to admit, albeit quietly, that perhaps this was one of the keys to American strength. Conversations grew more open at the mess tables over rations of bread, potatoes, or beans. Some spoke of their shock, confessing that before capture, they had imagined Americans as cruel beasts. Instead, they found them methodical, orderly, even in something as seemingly mundane as bathing. Others went further, suggesting this reflected a civilization built on abundance and efficiency, one with the resources to extend care, even to its enemies. Debates arose because pride still lingered. Many bristled at the suggestion that America might be superior. Yet the evidence was undeniable. Their own clean skin, healed sores, and improved health could not be ignored. For some, this realization left a bitter taste. They muttered that such comfort was intended to weaken them, to strip away the endurance that had once defined Japanese soldiers. But others felt something subtler, a quiet, reluctant respect. They began to see the showers not merely as hygiene, but as a glimpse into the industrial might, the philosophy, and the order of their captors. In hushed tones, a few admitted the experience had quietly reshaped how they imagined the world beyond the wire. The showers, once feared as instruments of cruelty, had become centers of revelation. They were no longer just about soap and water. They revealed a stark contrast between two worlds, showing that the enemy's power was not only in weapons, but in systems of life so advanced that even prisoners of war were drawn into their discipline. Years later, as many Japanese soldiers returned home after the war, the memories of captivity were tangled with shame, relief, and confusion. Yet amid countless impressions, one image remained vivid: the showers. Men who had fought across distant islands, who had watched comrades fall in jungle ambushes or under naval bombardments, recalled above all the sensation of hot water streaming from pipes, soap foaming in their hands, the enforced rhythm of cleanliness that had first unsettled and then transformed them. Some spoke of it to family members, describing awkwardly how the Americans had insisted on daily hygiene. Wives and mothers listened in disbelief. How could an enemy provide such care? Others stayed silent, reluctant to admit that captivity had offered comforts far greater than those their own army had allowed. But privately, many acknowledged the truth. The camp showers had altered how they saw the world. Endless hot water became proof of a civilization different from their own. Modern, abundant, and organized in ways Japan, despite discipline and tradition, could not match during the war years. The memory was not sentimental. At first, showers had felt strange, humiliating, even frightening. But as wounds healed, lice vanished, and disease subsided, the association grew stronger. Cleanliness had become a form of strength. They realized that health was not a luxury, but a weapon, one the Americans wielded silently yet powerfully. In conversations years after repatriation, some admitted that this lesson stayed with them more than any military tactic. The quiet, transformative power of modern living standards, and the unexpected dignity it could bring even to captives. Historians who later spoke with them noticed one detail appeared again and again: the showers. Unlike food or work assignments, which varied between camps, the daily ritual of hygiene left a deeper mark. Men who had endured starvation or grueling marches could tolerate meager rations without much thought. But being handed soap and towels, being led into steaming rooms of hot water, it was unforgettable. It was so completely unlike anything they had experienced during the war. The showers did not symbolize indulgence. They embodied a different worldview, one in which even prisoners were recognized as human beings deserving of care. The lessons lingered long after repatriation. Some men carried the habits into civilian life, washing more diligently, insisting on soap even when scarce. and teaching their children that cleanliness was discipline, not weakness for these former prisoners. The camp showers were more than a routine, they were revelations. The memory was bittersweet. It recalled defeat, surrender, and the loss of freedom. Yet it also recalled survival and unexpected dignity in the hands of those they had been taught to hate. In those moments, a paradox emerged. In the midst of humiliation, they glimpsed a form of modernity they could not forget. The showers were never just about water and soap. They were about discovering that order, care, and cleanliness, even under captivity, could reshape a man's understanding of himself, his body, and the world around him.